The mahogany dresser gleamed under the late afternoon light, each careful cloth motion tracing a story of discipline and invisibility. Grace Carter worked in silence, the kind of silence that had defined her life for years inside the Whitmore Grand Chicago. A towering landmark of luxury in the city's heart, her dark fingers trembled slightly as she polished the surface, the silver locket around her neck catching the glow of the setting sun. Inside the worn pendant rested the only photograph she had of her grandmother, a deaf woman who raised her, taught her that hands could be as eloquent as voices, and that strength could be found in the quietest forms of communication. Grace often signed to herself while she worked, whispers of memory expressed in the language that made her feel whole. Now, as the room stood empty, her hands moved fluidly, shaping a familiar phrase her grandmother had given her during the most challenging times. "I'm enough, little bird. I'm enough." The silent prayer steadied her, just as it always had. Then came the sound that would undo her. On the nightstand, a forgotten phone buzzed to life. Grace froze. She knew that ringtone. It was Derek Sinclair's. The device was programmed to pick up specific calls on speaker automatically. Before she could stop it, the line connected. "Derek, thank God you answered," came a woman's voice, crisp and hurried. Grace recognized her instantly. Vanessa Cole, a rising PR executive in the fashion industry. Relief and affection laced Derek's reply. "I'm in the lobby finishing paperwork with the concierge. And no, I'm finally free of Grace. Free." The word struck harder than any physical blow. Vanessa's laugh carried through the speaker, smooth and sharp. "Good. What were you thinking about staying with her? She's just a maid who tries to make herself interesting with those silly hand gestures. It's like she's conducting an invisible orchestra. You deserve better." Grace's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear Derek's answer, but the words landed like knives. "Exactly. Can you imagine introducing her to my clients? A college dropout who gave up everything for me and still couldn't keep me interested. She was convenient. That's all. You, Vanessa, you're my real future." His laughter was cold, merciless. The cloth slipped from Grace's fingers and fell onto the marble floor. She stood frozen, every breath shallow, the weight of betrayal pressing against her chest. Her hands, once steady with memory, now moved in desperation, spelling out words she never thought she would sign. "Grandma. I failed. I failed." But Grace was not alone. Unseen by her, footsteps had paused just outside the doorway. Charles Whitmore, the hotel owner, stood in the hall, his tall frame tense as he listened. He hadn't meant to overhear. He had been walking the executive floors on his way back from a meeting when the cruel voices spilled into the hall, and then he saw Grace standing by the dresser with trembling hands, signing phrases he hadn't witnessed since his sister Emma was alive. Emma, whose cancer had taken her far too soon, whose deafness had always been a barrier he never worked hard enough to overcome. The guilt of never learning SL fluently, sufficient to connect with her, truly had haunted him for years. Charles's breath caught. The movements of Grace's hands were heartbreakingly familiar. A mirror of Emma's fluid signing before illness weakened her fingers. He watched, transfixed, as Grace gathered her supplies with shaking hands and slipped out through the service corridor, unaware she had been observed. The phone remained abandoned on the dresser, still glowing with the end of the call. As if mocking her, Charles stayed rooted in the doorway, unable to move, haunted not just by the cruelty he had overheard but by the desperate, eloquent signs of a woman whose pain echoed his own. At that moment, he didn't know what role she would play in his life or how their stories would collide. All he knew was that he had just witnessed a heart shatter in silence, and it stirred something inside him he hadn't felt since Emma's death. Sometimes the universe places broken hearts in the same room, not to destroy each other, but to begin the slow work of healing if they are brave enough to recognize the signs. The Whitmore Grand Chicago lobby was a marble and glass cathedral, its soaring ceilings and polished brass fixtures reflecting wealth and order. Guests bustled in every direction, checking in, calling for bellhops, rushing to elevators. To the outside world, it was seamless luxury, but to a child, it could feel like a storm. 6-year-old Mia Whitmore stood at the base of the grand staircase, her small body rigid with fear. The tide of adults swept past her, their voices a blur of noise she could not process. Tears streamed down her face. She tried to call out, but no one responded. No one understood the language she needed. A few feet away, Grace Carter was polishing the brass railings, forcing herself to focus on routine after the devastation in room 412. Her body moved on autopilot, but her thoughts churned. She felt invisible, just as Derek had called her. Then she noticed the child. Grace set aside her cloth and crouched to Mia's level. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said softly, calm but gentle. And then, instinctively, her hands began to move. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." Mia's wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto Grace's signing. For the first time since she'd been separated from her nanny in the crowd, recognition dawned. Hope flickered. Her small hands moved in halting but eager signs. I can't find my daddy. Too many people. No one knows my language. Grace's throat tightened, but she kept her movements fluid and steady. Your daddy loves you very much. He's probably looking for you right now. Do you want me to help you find him? Mia nodded quickly, relief flooding her face. Then, to Grace's surprise, the little girl leaned forward and hugged her. Against Grace's shoulder, Mia signed with trembling hands. You understand me? Just like Mommy did. Grace's breath caught. She tightened the hug instinctively, her heart twisting at the mention of the child's late mother. From the mezzanine level, Charles Whitmore spotted his daughter. Panic surged through him, but what froze him in place was the sight below. Mia. Calm in the arms of a hotel employee, her hands rushing in signs Charles struggled to follow. He descended the staircase quickly. Heart pounding. Mia, he said, thick with emotion, there you are. I was worried sick. Grace rose to her feet, still holding Mia's hand protectively. She was just overwhelmed by the crowd, sir. She's fearless. Charles's gaze shifted to Grace, his eyes catching the nameplate on her uniform. Grace Carter. His attention lingered longer not just on her name, but on her hands, which continued to sign gently, reassuring Mia even as she spoke aloud. This was the woman from room 412, whose singing had cracked open the vault of his grief about Emma. You know ASL, Charles said, his tone carefully neutral. Grace straightened slightly under his scrutiny. Yes, sir. My grandmother was deaf. She raised me. Before Charles could respond, Mia interrupted, her hands moving with an energy he hadn't seen in months. Daddy, she knows magic. She says you love me very much and you're learning my language because love takes practice. Charles's throat tightened. He'd been fumbling with ASL lessons for 2 years, desperate to connect with his daughter after Sarah's death. But his attempts had frustrated them both. Watching Mia's joy now, lit by this stranger's effortless fluency, pierced him. He turned back to Grace. Thank you, he said quietly. Then, with visible effort, his large hands formed the words in awkward but sincere ASL. Thank you for Mia. Grace's eyes widened, startled by the attempt. The child just needs to be heard, she replied gently, signing as she spoke. All children do. Charles felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't allowed in years, a crack of light breaking through the armor of guilt and control. I couldn't tell Emma what you just told me, he admitted suddenly, the words spilling out before he could stop them. I never learned enough to really talk to her before she died. Grace's expression softened. Communication is about connection, not perfection. Your sister knew you loved her, did she? His voice was a whisper. How could she, when I couldn't understand her final words? The pain in his eyes mirrored the pain Grace carried in her own. For a brief moment, two people who had lived different lives but suffered the same failures stood connected in the middle of the grand lobby. Grace reached for Mia's small hand again. Steady and reassuring. It's never too late to learn, she said gently. Love waits for us to find the right words. And as the three stood together, an invisible triangle forged by loss but tethered by language, Grace realized she was being seen in a way she hadn't been in years. And Charles felt the first flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could still be the father and brother he had once failed to be. The service corridor smelled faintly of bleach and detergent, its fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. It was a place invisible to guests but familiar to Grace Carter, the arteries of the Whitmore Grand Chicago, where the unseen labor of keeping luxury alive quietly took place. Grace had just clocked out, her housekeeping cart pushed neatly against the wall, when a tall figure stepped from the shadows near the business center. Derek Sinclair. He wore a slim-cut designer suit, his polished shoes echoing on the linoleum. Every inch of him radiated the image of success he cultivated so obsessively. But his eyes gleamed with something darker. Well, he drawled, blocking her path with calculated ease. Look who's been making friends in high places. Grace's pulse quickened. Derek, I thought your meeting was with the events manager. Finished early, his smirk deepened. Imagine my surprise when I heard my pathetic ex-girlfriend has been getting cozy with the hotel owner himself. Sleeping your way into promotions now? Clever, Grace, very clever. Her chest tightened. You need to leave. She tried to step around him, but he moved to block her again, his hand clamped around her wrist swiftly, his rings biting her skin. His voice dropped, low and venomous. You embarrassed me, Grace. My colleagues know I dumped a maid. Do you have any idea how that makes me look in my industry? You made me a joke. Grace pulled against his grip, her voice firm but shaking. Let me go, but Derek only tightened his hold. Ungrateful, he spat. I gave you purpose. I gave you directions. Without me, you're nothing but a dropout scrubbing toilets. And you dare to walk away? Grace yanked free with sudden strength, stumbling back a step. You gave me nothing but pain. I lost. Her voice cracked, but she forced the words out. I lost everything because of you. Derek's expression twisted into contempt. You lost nothing. Grace, because you are nothing. The words landed like stones. Suffocating and cruel, a uniformed security guard, drawn by the raised voices, appeared down the hall. Is there a problem here? Derek's hand dropped instantly, his face smoothing into an expression of injured innocence. Just a misunderstanding, he said easily. My ex has been following me, creating scenes. I was trying to calm her down. That's not true. Grace protested, her voice breaking. But standing there in her housekeeping uniform, tears in her eyes, she looked small against Derek's polished authority. The guard's expression faltered, clearly weighing appearances more than words. Ma'am, HR will need a report on this. Company policy for personal disputes on property. Derek straightened his jacket with a smug little smile. He'd won this round. Grace's stomach twisted with shame and helplessness. She'd been blamed again, disciplined for being the victim of his cruelty. The walls of her world seemed to close in tighter with every step. An hour later, she sat in the storage room, surrounded by shelves of cleaning supplies. Her hands shook as she signed to the air, the words breaking from her like sobs. Grandma, I'm not strong enough. I can't do this anymore. The door creaked open. Hey, said a warm voice. A maintenance worker with kind eyes and calloused hands, Alex Martinez, stepped inside. He offered her a clean handkerchief from his tool bag. I heard what happened with that designer jerk. Man's got poison in his veins. I got written up, Grace whispered bitterly, for defending myself. HR said I should have de-escalated instead of provoking him. Alex's jaw tightened. That's not right. He laid hands on you. You did nothing wrong. Doesn't matter, she said, shaking her head. People like Derek always win. People like me survive. Alex reached into his bag again, pulling out something wrapped in soft cloth. Your locker got damaged in last month's flood. We saved what we could. Thought you'd want this back. He unwrapped a framed photograph her grandmother captured mid-sign, eyes full of laughter and love. Grace's breath caught. She touched the frame with trembling fingers. She told me once, Alex said quietly, that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up. And helping others up too. Grace clutched the photo. Tears streamed down her face. Her voice cracked into confession. I lost a baby because of him, Alex. The stress, the fights, the way he twisted everything. I miscarried at 12 weeks. And I never told anyone because Derek convinced me it was my fault for being weak. Alex's expression hardened, anger flashing not at her but for her. That's not weakness. That's trauma. And you survived it. Which makes you stronger than you know. Grace's hands moved without conscious thought, signing the refrain that haunted her. I'm not enough. I'll never be enough. What Grace didn't know was that she wasn't alone. Just outside the door, Charles Whitmore stood frozen, having come to find her after hearing of the confrontation. He had arrived just in time to hear her confession, the baby, the miscarriage, the crushing words she signed. His chest tightened with grief and fury. For her, for Emma, for all the words left unsaid and unheard, he didn't enter. Not yet, this wasn't his moment. But in that quiet hallway, he made a silent vow. Derek Sinclair would never hurt Grace Carter again, and somehow, some way, he would help her see what she could not yet believe, that she was not only enough, she was extraordinary. The following morning, Grace Carter's stomach churned as she stepped into the staff elevator. The digital panel glowed as the car ascended toward the 20th floor, home to the Whitmore Grand Chicago executive offices. Her inbox that morning had held a simple message: please report to my office. See Whitmore. She was sure it meant the end. After yesterday's confrontation with Derek Sinclair and the following HR reprimand, she had braced herself for termination. The elevator ride felt like a slow march to her own execution. The doors opened to gleaming glass walls and sweeping views of Chicago's skyline. She knocked softly on the frosted door marked Charles Whitmore, CEO. Come in, his deep voice called. Grace entered, nerves stretched taut. The office was modern, but not cold. Sunlight spilled across floor-to-ceiling windows. Catching on a framed photo of a smiling little girl, Mia, Charles stood by the glass, his reflection fractured by the cityscape behind him. He turned, and Grace noticed the vulnerability in his eyes for the first time. Grace, sit down, please. She perched on the edge of the chair. Every muscle tense. I owe you an apology, Charles began. His hands flexed at his sides, fists unclenching as though he were physically forcing himself to soften. I heard what happened yesterday, Derek cornering you, the guard dismissing you, HR blaming you for being attacked. I should have intervened sooner. I failed you. The same way I failed Emma. Grace blinked, startled. Sir, you don't owe me. You're not just anything, he interrupted, voice firm. You're the person who comforted my daughter when she was lost. You're the woman who signs words that reach places even I can't. You are important, Grace. Her throat tightened, tears threatening. She hadn't heard words like that in years. Charles took a step closer. Yesterday I overheard you in the storage room. I didn't mean to intrude, but I heard your pain. The baby you lost. The way Derek convinced you it was your fault. His voice dropped, thick with empathy. I've carried guilt too. Emma died without ever hearing me say what she needed. And Sarah Mia's mother was killed in a car accident while I sat in a meeting I thought was more important than picking her up at the airport. I know what it is to drown in regret. Grace swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. Then you know why I'm not the right person for anything more than this job. Derek spent years convincing me I ruin everything I touch. That I'm a burden disguised as help. Charles's gaze sharpened, protective. Derek is a poison who diminished you to make himself feel powerful. But I've seen you with Mia. I've seen you light up her world just by understanding her language. That isn't someone who ruins. That's someone who heals. He drew in a steadying breath, then extended his hand not to touch her but to sign. Clumsy but determined, you are enough. The words hit Grace with the weight of truth she had long forgotten. Charles continued, his voice regaining its commanding edge. I want to offer you a new position. Accessibility coordinator for this hotel. You would oversee staff training in ASL basics, design programs to serve our deaf and hard of hearing guests better, and make this place more than just a luxury brand. It will become inclusive. Grace's eyes widened. Mr. Whitmore, I don't have formal qualifications for that. I'm not certified. You have something far more valuable than a certificate, Charles said, cutting gently but firmly through her protest. You have lived experience. You have fluency, heart, and empathy. You can bridge worlds that most of us don't even realize exist. Grace's fingers found the silver locket at her neck, the image of her grandmother inside. She could almost feel her presence, whispering through memory. Little bird, your wings are meant to carry others, not just yourself. Charles leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering with sincerity. I don't want to fail Mia the way I failed Emma. Please help me, teach us. Let this hotel become a place where no guest ever feels invisible. Grace's chest swelled with a mix of fear and hope. What if I disappoint you? She whispered. You won't. His voice was unwavering. And even if you stumble, I'll still believe in you. Because I've seen who you are, Grace, and I know you're more than enough. Silence stretched between them, heavy but alive. For the first time in years, Grace felt seen. Not as Derek's discarded maid, not as HR's reprimanded staff, but as a woman with something valuable to give. Her hands moved, hesitant at first, then firm. I'll do it. Charles's smile was quiet but radiant, breaking through his usual reserve. Relief, respect, and something unspoken flickered across his features. And so, in the marble heart of a hotel built on appearances, a new chapter began, not with the clamor of applause or the signing of contracts, but with two wounded souls choosing to rebuild. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Grace Carter had known. Each morning she trained hotel staff in the basics of SL, teaching them to fingerspell names and sign words like thank you and welcome. She watched front desk clerks, bellhops, and restaurant servers light up when they successfully connected with deaf guests in a new but empowering language. In the afternoons, she spent time with Mia, helping with homework and practicing signs that turned learning into laughter. For the first time in years, Grace felt her days had purpose, but shadows crept in, whispering doubt. The first email arrived late one evening. Word is spreading about your new position. Staff are asking questions about your qualifications. Some think it's unfair that housekeeping gets promoted while professionals are passed over. Just thought you should know. A concerned colleague. Grace stared at the screen, Derek's voice echoing in her mind. Pathetic maid. Just convenient. She deleted the message, but the damage was done. Days later, another email. People are laughing behind your back. A maid teaching them SL. It's a joke. You'll never be anything more than Derek's placeholder. The poisonous thoughts multiplied. Every smile from a colleague felt like mockery. Every word of praise from Charles seemed like pity, and then came the phone call that tipped everything into chaos. Charles was on a call with organizers of the upcoming National Accessibility Conference at McCormick Place. His voice warm with pride. Yes, we have an excellent interpreter on staff. Grace Carter has been doing incredible work here. She'll be perfect for the mainstage presentations. Grace froze in the hallway outside his office. Perfect. She wasn't even certified. Yes, she was fluent, raised with SL as her second skin, but professionals trained for years to interpret at conferences. She couldn't risk humiliating Charles in the hotel. That evening, she walked into his office, determination and dread warring inside her. Charles, I need to be honest with you. I'm not a certified interpreter. I never claimed to be. I learned from my grandmother and I'm fluent, but I don't have the formal credentials. I can't represent this hotel at a national event. You deserve someone qualified. Charles set down his pen and studied her carefully. You waited until now to tell me this. The conference is next week. I'd rather disappoint you with honesty than fail you publicly with a lie, Grace said, her voice shaking. Please find someone else. Charles leaned forward, his eyes blazing with conviction. Grace, I need to ask you something. Are you sabotaging yourself because someone convinced you success isn't meant for people like you? Her lips parted, but no words came. I've seen you, he pressed. You connected with Mia in ways no certified interpreter has. You've trained my staff to see accessibility not as a policy but as humanity. You've given voice to people who felt invisible in this hotel. So tell me, are these doubts yours? Or are they Derek's still echoing in your head? Tears burned her eyes. Slowly, she pulled out her phone and showed him the anonymous emails. Charles's jaw tightened as he read. These are Derek's words. I'd recognize his poison anywhere, but what if he's right? Grace whispered. What if I'm setting myself up for another failure? Charles walked around his desk and knelt before her, his expression fierce but tender. Grace, look at me, she lifted tear-filled eyes to his. You belong wherever your heart, skills, and courage are needed. The deaf community doesn't need your certification. They need your authenticity. They need someone who signs with soul. From the corner, Mia looked up from her homework, catching only pieces of the conversation but sensing its weight. Her small hands moved urgently. Grace makes words beautiful like Mommy did. She doesn't need papers. Magic is in her hands. Grace's breath caught at the child's words. Charles nodded firmly. The choice is yours. But don't let Derek's voice outside or inside your head steal your future. The day of the conference dawned bright and cold. McCormick Place thrummed with energy advocates, hotel executives, and deaf community leaders mingling. Their hands alive with conversation, Grace arrived early. Her stomach knotted with nerves. Dr. Elena Morales, a respected deaf professor and advocate, greeted her warmly. I've heard wonderful things about your work here, Elena sighed, her movements fluid. Would you consider co-interpreting my keynote today? My usual interpreter was injured in a car accident, and I need someone who signs from the heart, Grace stammered, both aloud and in signs. Dr. Morales, I'm not certified. Elena's smile was calm but firm. Certification teaches technique, but you can't certify authenticity. I would be honored if you stood beside me. Before Grace could respond, commotion erupted in the lobby. A familiar voice cut through the hum. That woman is a fraud. Derek Sinclair had arrived, his vendor badge flashing against his suit. She's just a maid pretending to be an interpreter. I dated her for 3 years. She's going to humiliate this conference. Gasps rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned toward Grace. Her body froze, old instincts screaming to shrink, to vanish. But before she could collapse under shame, Dr. Morales stepped forward, her hands slicing the air with authority. Young man, she said, her voice firm as she signed. I know exactly who Grace Carter is. She is someone who learned SL to love her grandmother better. She is someone who teaches children that their differences are strengths. Credentials are paper. Character is everything. Deaf delegates erupted into visual applause, their hands raised and shaking. Hearing attendees joined with thunderous clapping, Derek's face twisted with rage. Ask her about the baby she lost because she couldn't handle life. Ask her why she dropped out of school because she's a failure. Grace's chest constricted, her deepest wounds dragged into the light. But before she could falter, a small figure broke through the crowd. Mia. She walked straight to Grace, took her hand, and faced the audience with fierce determination. Her hands moved with perfect clarity. Grace is the bravest person I know. She teaches me that love doesn't need sound. She saved me and my daddy's heart too, Charles's voice translated thick with pride. My daughter says Grace is the bravest person she knows. And she's right. The applause swelled again, filling the hall. Grace's tears blurred her vision as she looked down at Mia. The little girl who had given her something Derek never could, the belief that love was stronger than shame. She turned back to Dr. Morales and nodded. I'll do it. And as she stepped onto the stage, standing tall beneath the lights, Grace Carter realized this was no longer about proving Derek wrong. It was about proving herself right. The applause inside McCormick Place still echoed in Grace Carter's ears hours later. Standing on stage, interpreting Dr. Elena Morales's keynote with fluid, poetic signs, she had felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, not in judgment, but in recognition. And when Mia had run to her, calling her mama for the first time in public, the moment had sealed itself in her heart forever. 3 weeks later, Grace was no longer a ghost in the hallways of the Whitmore Grand Chicago. She was the hotel's accessibility coordinator, training staff, updating policies, and ensuring guests who used ASL or assistive technology felt genuinely welcome. In the afternoons, she and Mia would sit together in Charles's office, filling it with laughter and signs. Grace's presence brought light back into spaces long shadowed by Charles's grief. But the most significant shift came one quiet evening. Charles entered the office carrying a folder. Nerves fractured his usual composure. "The community college called," he said. "They want you to head their new ASL interpreter program. Full faculty, tenure track. They're even offering to fast-track your certification based on your experience." Grace's heart stuttered. "But I never finished my degree." "They don't care," Charles said, his smile warm with pride. "They want you, your vision, your lived experience. Grace, you've already proven you can change systems." Before she could respond, Mia slipped off her chair and tugged at Grace's hand. With a grin, the little girl signed, "Say yes, Mama, please." Grace laughed through tears. "Are you both sure?" "I come with scars." With a messy past, Charles knelt before her, his hands trembling slightly as he signed with fluency that had grown over months of practice. "We all have scars. They prove we survived. Would you marry us, both of us? Let Mia have the mother she prays for every night. And let me have the partner I never knew I needed." Grace's vision blurred. She looked at Mia, whose small hands moved eagerly. "Say yes, Mama, forever and always." "Yes," Grace whispered, then signed with steady, confident hands. "Yes, to you, to Mia, to this family." Mia launched herself into Grace's arms, squealing with delight. Charles wrapped them both in his embrace, his own tears falling freely. In that moment, the maid who had once been invisible became the heartbeat of a family. 18 months later, Grace stood at the podium of a packed auditorium. Behind her hung a banner, "First Graduating Class Community Designed ASL Interpreter Program." Rows of students, deaf and hearing alike, celebrated their journey toward becoming bridge builders. Charles and Mia sat in the front row, their hands moving in proud applause. "You are joining a community of connectors," Grace told the graduates, her voice as graceful as her words. "You've learned not just a language, but a way of seeing the world. Communication is about connection, not perfection. And love is the most universal language of all." After the ceremony, Mia handed her a handmade card covered in drawings of hands forming the sign for "I love you." Scrawled in colorful letters, "For the best teacher and mama in the world." Grace knelt, tears shimmering. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" Charles slipped his hand into hers, sighing effortlessly. "We are home." As Grace tucked Mia into bed that evening, the little girl whispered with sleepy hands, "Mama Grace, tell me the story again. The one about broken hearts finding each other." Charles sat on the edge of the bed, his large hands moving with ease. "Once upon a time, a little bird thought her wings were too damaged to fly." Grace watched from the doorway, her heart overflowing. For the first time, she believed what her grandmother had always told her. She was enough. They were enough, exactly as they were.